This is Winchester Academy.
And it is my honor and privilege to introduce Dr. Daniel Saunders. He is a professor in the social work department at the University of Michigan. And he also happens to be my brother-in-law. So I've known Dan for over 40 years. He has done extremely excellent work in the field of domestic abuse awareness and has been an expert witness at trials throughout our nation and has recently come back from a Fulbright seminar and session down in Australia and New Zealand. So his global perspective on domestic abuse has certainly been expanded just recently. So if we could all give a warm welcome to Daniel Saunders.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Sorry. Are we okay? Wow. Okay, I hope I didn't pierce any eardrums. Thanks, Kate, for that warm greeting and for putting me up and putting up with me last night, tonight. Thanks to the planning committee for bringing me here. It's a real honor. Thank you. Thanks to Vance and Ann for their sponsorship. And congratulations for being here tonight, because this ain't an easy topic. Why would you come out on a night to go to the library and hear about the tragic happenings within the family? So congratulations for being here, for being willing to listen. I hope to keep it really upbeat, though, not to talk about the problem, but to talk about the solutions, to talk about preventing domestic abuse before it ever happens. So I have a lot of smiling kids and smiling dads and moms and music, and I hope you'll come away feeling more up than down. But congratulations for being here. In fact, let me give voice to the leaders within what we've called a movement. I started working with battered women and abusers back in the mid-'70s in Madison, helping to start a shelter, starting an abuser program. And one day somebody said, Dan, you know, we're part of a movement. And I never thought about it that way, but we were. But I want to thank voices in the movement, the women who have been leaders. And here are just a couple of those voices as a preview to what we're going to get into tonight. This is one of the campaigns that I'm going to share with you and talk about. 1 Billion Rising, a worldwide movement involving over 200 nations. Okay, got the rhythm? All over the world, groups can join together and upload their own videos of these dance moves or create their own, come up with their own words for the music, and I'll give some examples of that. But I wanted to honor women leaders in the movement, women I worked with in Madison and Milwaukee and all over the country, where men, a few of us men get on board and take part. And so I wanted to honor their voices to begin with. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what is domestic abuse, what are the parameters, why do we focus on prevention, talk about global campaigns, and then bring those campaigns right down to Wisconsin to the Fox Valley, to Chippewa Falls, to Wapaka County. And before we do that, though, what comes to mind when you hear the word family? Let's have a little shout-out session here. So just anybody shout out family. When you hear that, what comes to mind for you in your gut?
Parents, children.
Children,
Parents,
grandparents,
love,
love,
Closeness.
closeness,
Sharing.
sharing, great, okay.
Extra people.
Home, extended family, yeah, living together. So love and
Joy.
warmth, joy, all of those good warm feelings that we think about when we think of the word family. The sad reality is that along with those positive images, it turns out that the family is more dangerous than non-family situations. You are safer on the street than you are in the family. We talk to kids about danger in the stranger situation. Stranger danger is what we talk about. And for young women on campuses, we often talk about the stranger rapist. But the reality is it's the acquaintance, it's the dating partner. In the family, it's the dad, the mom, who are either violent towards children or violent with each other, exposing the children to violence, which has the same effect as if they were being abused themselves, witnessing it or hearing it, the terror that goes through kids. So I think that explains why we don't want to talk about it. I mean, it goes against our ideal of the family, and we don't like to think about these tragic events that happen in families. So we shove it under the rug and don't want to talk about it. So thanks for being here. When I say domestic abuse, I mean not only physical violence, but also emotional abuse, coercive behavior. We've learned a lot about sexual abuse. A lot of us tend to focus on female victims. There are male victims. There are quite a few of them, but the problem tends to be more on the side of female victims, partly because physically and psychologically they are more injured, and then they tend to use violence. Many battered women do use violence, but it's often in self-defense. And so when you read about studies out there that say there are equal rates of violence by men and women, that's true. And there are hundreds and hundreds of studies showing that. But if you ask about the motive, if you ask about why they were using the violence, women are 7 times more likely than men to be killing in self-defense, for example. So it's really skewed that way, and you have to be very careful when you're looking at the research that's out there. So what does domestic violence look like? We had an example a year ago, and this picture here is purposely blurred. I could show you the video of Ray Rice punching his girlfriend and knocking her out in the elevator. 2 weeks before that, in the elevator video, we did have the video of him dragging, I don't know, do you know Ray Rice, the Ravens player? Okay, so we did have the picture of him dragging her out of the elevator, unconscious, and just kind of flopping her there and standing by and not doing anything, basically, not tending to her. And then a couple weeks later, we had the picture of him punching her, knocking her unconscious in the elevator. This is the only shot I'm going to show you of any violence because I don't want to show you that very violent video. People in this room are survivors, and so I don't want to be triggering trauma in your lives right now. And Ray Rice has made a lot of contrition during that last year. So he says to us, domestic violence is real. It happens every 12 seconds as we speak. And then he says, and this is very cool, where he's speaking to the kids, to all the kids who looked up to me, I'm truly sorry for letting you down. But I hope it's helped you to learn that one bad decision can turn your dream into a nightmare. There's no excuse for domestic violence, and I apologize for the horrible mistake I made. I hope to make a positive difference in people's lives by raising awareness of this issue. And we'll see. I mean, he's talking about it as a single episode. Usually it isn't. Usually it's a pattern that goes on, starting soon after the dependency forms in the relationship, soon after the one partner thinks, well, she's not going to leave me. She really loves me and she can't leave. she doesn't have a job, and so, the battering starts very small with a shove, a shout, and then builds from there. So we'll see. The proof is in the pudding in terms of how he actually does. We have another example, though, in the NFL, who was, I think, with the Panthers. I can't remember. So this is trivia time for you all. So what was Terry Bradshaw talking about here? Very forcefully, about 3 weeks ago. Anybody that lays a hand on a woman, I don't care who you are, my friend, you never know, you never come back to this league, you're out. That's it. That is now his position. So who was he referring to here? Anybody know? No? Greg Hardy, and Greg Hardy was just signed on to which team?
Dallas.
The Dallas Cowboys, yeah. So Terry Bradshaw is saying that the Dallas Cowboys they've been enabling this man. Greg Hardy is very arrogant when asked about things he's learned since his arrest and since the trial that he was in. What has he learned about himself, about domestic violence? And he went on talking about how great he's going to be as a player for the Dallas Cowboys. And I've really made it now. I'm with the Cowboys.
He pulled a shenanigans Sunday. He was on TV.
He was on TV Sunday for doing what?
Arguing with his coaches.
Oh, okay. Well, talk about attitude. This guy's got an attitude. And so Terry and other commentators have been really, really saying the NFL and the Cowboys should have done more than they did in that particular case. His violence was worse than Ray Rice's, and I won't go into the details of that. So we want to focus then on prevention, and why do we do that? So there's two social workers I want to tell you about, Mo and Joe. Mo from Minnesota, Joe in Wisconsin. They're sitting across from each other on the St. Croix River, and they notice that these bodies are coming down the river, people drowning. They have to pull them out of the river and bring them to shore and try to help them out. So at one point, Joe looks up and sees way upstream this waterfalls, and people are being thrown over the waterfalls. So he thinks, wow, I'm going to go up there and see what's going on. And Mo says, where are you going? There's lots of people here that need your help. Stay here with me. We have to help these people who are drowning. And Joe simply says, I'm going to go upstream to find out why so many people are falling in the river. So for those of us that focus on intervention, yes, there's a job that we have to pull people out of that river to save them, keep them from drowning, but certainly we got to have a lot of people upstream helping people from getting thrown in the first place, to stop abuse from happening before it ever happens. So the take home here, I hope you see, is that Minnesota social workers aren't quite as bright as Wisconsin social workers. I think you probably got that right away. One of the good pieces of news, anthropologists have found that there are societies in the world where there has been little or no child abuse, little or no domestic violence, and some of these have been almost wiped out, but note that Native American tribes like the Fox, not far from here, the Iroquois in New York, and others, back in the day, there was little or no family violence. Then we have one tribe in Africa, we have some South Sea islands, we have the Ban Chan Society in Thailand, where pretty incredibly, they looked at the reasons why there was little wife abuse. And you look at their culture, and would you believe that men and women were both midwives, a male midwife? Men and women were equal in taking responsibility for plowing out in the field. They were equally likely to be the mayor of the town. It was very easy to get a divorce. We are sad when people split up and get divorced, but ease of getting out of a bad relationship really helps people reduce the violence in their lives. And so there's lots of implications from that particular study. And I won't go into the detail there. The song that I opened with came then from this tremendous movement around the world that takes place What's February 14th? Valentine's Day, yeah. So purposely, Eve Ensler put it on Valentine's Day to say, we need to wake up to what happens in romantic relationships. There's too many relationships where young women take the controlling behavior as a sign of love. You know, I'm at a party and he's just really jealous. You know, he doesn't want me to talk to other men. Isn't that sweet? He must really love me. You know, and we have so many high school women, college women who are not understanding the controlling nature of that violence. So the notion is that we have a world of 7 billion people, and it means that 1 billion of them, girls and women, are being victimized every year, or in their lifetime rather, beaten or raped during their lifetime, 1 out of 3. And that's pretty consistent with stats in the US when it comes to domestic abuse. About 1 out of 3 during their lifetime, some form of physical force being used. So I want to take you on a quick trip around the world. Here in India, we've got women talking about how to stop trafficking of humans, you know, young girls being pushed off, sometimes by their family, to sell themselves in another city. Very sad situations, but that's what poverty often does. In Guatemala, we've got the One Finger Up for 1 Billion Rising, schoolgirls in Guatemala joining up with university and colleges to focus on justice in cases of violence against women. In Italy, the taxi cab drivers are putting up decals in their taxis saying, respect women. You know, make that a kind of prayer, in fact. Make that something close to your heart, the wish to respect women. That was their particular campaign last year. In London, we had young people coming together using social media as part of a campaign for teenagers to respect themselves and their bodies, the love revolution. Here is one of the videos that was put together in one of the countries and submitted, uploaded.
O la mano en tu corazón.
That's your life clock. Someday, it's gonna stop. A lot of things are gonna happen in the world between now and then. So what are you gonna do while you're here? Stand on the sidelines? Or are you gonna be part of something bigger?
Two hearts. Dancing, rising up, demanding an end to violence. Okay. So that movement has come to the Fox Valley Rising. 4 organizations coming together, the leadership, Fox Cities Youth, Harbor House, Domestic Violence Program, Fox Cities Sexual Assault Program, the Fox Valley Voices of Men. And I'll tell you a little more about them in a bit here. So they dance together. You notice the folks there that look like they might be African American are African. They're Congolese refugees who have just horrendous stories of what they went through being forced during wartime to do awful things to other family members at the point of a gun. And so they spoke out at the rally. And there's a lot of information you can get on the good old web, including YouTube videos of their testimonies and their speeches, and then the dance that they put together as well. An organization that is men coming together was formed back in 1991 when there was a massacre at the University of Montreal. 14 engineering students were shot by someone who was rejected from the engineering program. So a man in his late 20s came in with a rifle and had them stand up along the chalkboard and massacred these women. And since then, men banded together in Canada, and now it's spread all over the world, to take a pledge, basically, that I will never commit, condone, or remain silent about violence toward women. So it's expanded to not only men, but how to engage young men and boys through programming and getting rid of harmful ideas about manhood. How can we change a bit our traditional macho ways so that we can think about manliness as nurturing, manliness as gentleness, as well as strength? It doesn't mean giving up what we've got. It means expanding who we are to be more fully human. And so in New Zealand, we have a poster program like this one. And notice how this does something about redefining masculinity. Are you man enough to stop violence towards women? So a challenge, are you man enough? Here is a ride sponsored every year by the White Ribbon there. It includes the long North Island, the long South Island. So from top of the country to the south, you see bikers getting out to build respect for women and to stop violence. Here's a program in London, Love and Respect. He learns it from you. So how can we as men really focus on what we transmit, not by what we say, but what we do, how our modeling makes a difference in the lives of our kids and other people's kids. And then for young people, ask, respect, listen. And then in a number of places, some very practical advice on what to do. So it's not simply saying, make a pledge to stop being violent or stop being silent or to stop giving support to violent and sexist statements. It's being respectful towards women, never using force, asking first whether it's okay even to hold hands or kiss, being a good role model, challenging and speaking out against hurtful language, or something, a lot of us talk about something as simple within a couple seconds of not laughing at a sexist joke. It's one thing to tell it, but also one way we can draw back from supporting the basis for violence against women is simply not engaging in the laughter. And then starting a White Ribbon Club or a campaign. And that movement has gone all around the world. We have here in southern Ontario, Native Alaskans with a poster campaign. I admire her strength. And then for young people, our strength is not for hurting, so when guys disrespect women, we say something. We say that's not right in showing that disrespect. So an example from the Canadian White Ribbon Campaign. And then we do have national group or international groups, an international study sponsored by Men Engage called the Images Project, the International Center for Research on Women sponsored a project on gender roles and men and what they found. Okay, so it included, an early study included 6 countries. They've included a lot more now. And I'm simply showing you the range of levels of violence across these 6 countries. And there's many different variations when it comes to attitudes, when it comes to many other features of respect for women, caring for kids. In some countries, there's a lot of child care on the part of men. Even looking at how many go to the hospital and are there during the delivery of one of their kids. Great variation around the world. And that does make a difference in terms of right away feeling nurturing towards that child. Even we have research on going and watching the ultrasound or getting a video of an ultrasound and the bonding that occurs with even that small bit of connection that men make with the unborn child can make a huge difference in how nurturing they become with all of their children for a lifetime. So a huge difference. But you see here a range of incidents. This is lifetime rates of intimate partner violence ranging from 28% in Brazil to 41% in Rwanda. And then some big differences in attitudes and willingness to take part in family life, which has been called the second shift. Women working all day, coming home, and what are they faced with? Well, you know, did he do the dishes like he said he was going to? Is he taking care of the kids like he said or like I hoped? So we have a great deal of variation here when it comes to attitudes about women's roles. Women's most important role is to take care of her home and cook. It says her home rather than their home. And big differences there across countries. The low of 36% and then up to 85% agree with that in Rwanda. Men involved in changing diapers, giving kids a bath, and feeding kids. Is that the mother's responsibility? 10% in Brazil, 86% in India. So the countries varied a lot on attitudes like that and willingness to help out. And then the clincher is at the bottom there, that these attitudes about traditional roles for men are related to men's use of violence. So traditional or rigid gender attitudes, like the ones up above, are related to men's use of violence. And other factors are as well. Economic stress, work stress for men, you know, and all the things that men go through, which explains a lot of our behaviors and a lot of our early death compared to women. It has to do with work stress. And then we know from many studies here in the US and around the world, like this one, that childhood witnessing of violence, being abused, is certainly a big, big risk factor for men growing up to become violent. Okay, so we do have a huge initiative on the part of the United Nations. They have brought together people from all over the world, many different nonprofit organizations, many different governments. They have templates for governments to use to come up with new policies, but they've certainly done a wonderful job of bringing together groups like Men Engage into consortiums and into conferences to see what can be done around the world to engage men and boys in the fight against violence against women. Because if men are not on board, the problem will not end. All people need to be on board and rising up to stop violence against women. So these boys are in India. Teach your sons to respect women is the sign there. The Men Engage project is a global alliance of dozens of country networks around the globe meant to advance gender justice, human rights, social justice, to make a difference. This is part of one of their reports. The beginning of the report starts with this sentence: "We have the power to create change, many voices, many actions with strength for justice, so every girl and woman can live free of violence." An offshoot of that project is called Men Care, and here is one of their, Here's a compilation of their messages.
You tell me wonderful stories. You are my beach buddy.
You help me take my medicine.
You are the strongest man I know. You are always there. You aren't afraid to hold me close. You are my father.
4 out of 5 men will become fathers in their lifetime. Too often the focus is on the negative impact that men can have on the lives of their children and their mothers. These problems are real and they're impacting families everywhere, every day, in so many different ways, and something needs to change. Men Care is a new global campaign to promote the positive involvement of men as fathers and caregivers. We see the potential for a caring father in every man. Men Care supports programs and policies that help men create a happier, healthier life for their children, their children's mother, and for themselves. From encouraging men to be involved and educated from the very beginning of the journey, to staying active and engaged in raising their children, to being an equal partner in the home and teaching their children about a more respectful world. There are big challenges in the world, and engaging with men must be part of the solution. It's time to support the millions of fathers who are making a positive difference.
Men teach, change, share, respect. Men care.
We need you to care too. You can help improve the lives of women, children, and men all around the world. And it starts with one simple idea: support men's caregiving.
It's really strange how much some cultures fight against that. One of the videos they put together is of a Sri Lankan man. His wife went off to Cambodia, I think, to work and send money back. It was easier for her to get a job by going outside the country. So he had these 3 kids to take care of. And he goes off to the health clinic one day. I mean, he wasn't real hot on the idea of taking care of these kids. But when he goes off to the health clinic, it's like they didn't know what to do with him. He was, in their minds, not to be the one to be there. Where is your wife? Well, she's off in Cambodia working. We have to put some food on the table and she's got to work. And it took him some encouragement from the neighbors who noticed his rather awkward childcare at first, and then with their encouragement got more and more involved in their care. And then it took a change in the healthcare providers to realize that he's really their caregiver. He is number 1 right now in their lives. He's the only parent that they've got. And it took a while for them to accept it. So we have in a number of countries, Brazil is a good example of that, where health workers there didn't know what to do with the guy in the waiting room either. You know, what do you do with the dad? It's not who they're accustomed to working with. So health care providers need a lot of encouragement to reach out to men and support them in their role as fathers. It makes a difference. In New Zealand, there's a wonderful prevention program that the Maori, it's Maori-centered. So the indigenous peoples there, about 17% of the whole society in New Zealand is indigenous Maori, and then there's Pacific Islanders, large population of Pacific Islanders, about 15% of the population. So etu whānau is of the family. Whānau means family. They don't talk about abuse in the family. They don't talk about violence in the family. They talk about the family as the key support system for family members. By looking at our traditional values, our traditional Maori values of peace, connection, love, that's what's going to make the difference. So their vision is that we want to go back to our roots, a safe, strong, prosperous living with a clear sense of identity, cultural integrity, and to speak of strong and resilient whānau, moa moa, the dream of having this vision of safety within the family. So family seen as the place where people can really feel safe. And the word in Hawaiian, aloha, is closely related because they're cousins of each other. The Maori and the Hawaiian come from the Middle Polynesian group. And the word in Maori that's similar is aroa. The accent is on the first syllable, meaning to love without expecting in return. And here's a video that group put together to demonstrate that particular principle, one of the key principles of Maori culture.
We need to learn how to give. Despite all of the hara that we have experienced, all of the things that have been, we must learn to give to each other, to be able to serve each other without things, because purely and simply we love each other. What we want to get our children to do is to love each other, care about people, and teach them that violence solves nothing. So long as you install upon them that, when you come home, you're home, and the aroa is here, and it's always been here. Yeah, and they don't have to go and look for aroa anywhere else if they don't, because they don't need to. It's their home.
I think one of, and I see it time and time again, when fathers are cuddling their little babies, and you see the look and the softness in the face of these men who have had their challenges in life, and you look at them looking at their baby, either their mokapuna or their own son or their own daughter, and you look at the softness in their face, you look at the love and kindness that is, and the care that is coming through in the face of that man looking at the vulnerable little child. That is a beautiful, tender moment, and those are the things that I think are so beautiful and cherished. And actually, it makes me quite tearful when I see it. I see it now in my great-nephew, and I just think I see the outpouring of love, and I know that child will be loved.
I think.
That says it all to me. I see it in the eyes of my nephew. Brings tears to my eyes, and I know that he will be loved because of that image of what is in the eyes of my nephew, the love he's got for his son. One of the programs that I visited in Christ Church called Aviva gave up all of their direct intervention. They had a shelter for survivors. And they said, we're not reaching many of the women out there who are survivors. We're going to give up direct intervention for those who are coming down the stream, drowning, and we're going to work on keeping people from being shoved over the waterfalls. So they have people who have the lived experience of being a survivor, the lived experience of being an offender, reaching out to other women, to other men, and bringing them in a way that can open up their hearts and make a change, to show, here's what I've gone through, here's how I have changed my life, and now I believe that you can do the same. So we have men helping men build violence. One of the men saying, it was good to speak to someone who's had their own problems and battled through them. It showed me it can be done. It was talk from the heart, real life. In fatherhood groups for men who batter, we now have a focus that's dual. The men talk about their traditional roles, what they've been into as true men, and yet they can also imagine a much different kind of manhood, one where fathers are truly caring, empathic, and children then become very important motivators for nonviolence. The men often in these are groups for men who have been abusive, but the prevention piece is connecting up with their role as fathers and seeing that if I don't change, my little one is going to become abusive just like I have been. And I swore when I was growing up, I was not going to be like my old man. I was not going to be him, and yet look who I am. I've become him. And now I can stop that progression. I can stop that transmission from my generation to the next and break that generational cycle.
Why do you think that carries on to the next generation?
Why does it carry on? Witnessing it, it just comes out. I mean, you know, you might relate to that. When you're in a relationship, you might have sworn, you know, I'm not going to say what my mom said. I'm not going to become like my old man. And yet, under stress, that's often, isn't that true? Often that's what comes out. You know, oh, you know, I hate that happened because I swore I was not going to do to my kids what my folks did to me. I'm going to be different. And yet, under stress, it sadly does come out. One of the best prevention programs, the best, I would say, in the US is called Futures Without Violence. They've got great PSAs. The Ad Council of America donates millions of dollars of talent to their PSA announcements. So we've got posters like this for teenagers and for middle school kids. A little bit of sarcasm and humor, part of it. Your frequent calls greatly increase my ability to ignore things. You're much more attractive when you're not textually harassing me. So some way of getting to young people through a bit of humor. That's one of their programs called It's Not Cool. Then they have another one called Coaching Boys into Men, systematically working with high school and college coaches all over the country, saying you have such an important role to play. We were talking about the NFL and how maybe they've let down some players and some survivors in this country. Well, there's a chance for coaches on another level to make a difference. And the NFL is working hard on doing orientations of new football players coming in. They have PSAs that are done very well. So this group, in fact, Futures Without Violence, has also been working with the NFL. A lot of the focus, though, is on high school and middle school. Then we've got work in middle school. Here's a theater troupe down in Austin, Texas, the Start Strong program. Here's an example of building awareness about digital abuse. Isn't that scary what kids are doing now with the bullying through Facebook, texting, Snapchat, Twitter, on and on. And it's hard for you folks and grandparents to keep track, to keep up on all of that. You know, how do you monitor what's going on? So college counselors and teachers and high school counselors and teachers are up on it and trying to educate young people about the dangers. Here's one example of a piece that was designed for, I think, middle school or high school.
So, I've been seeing this girl, and I was on her profile page yesterday, when I noticed a very flirty comment from another guy. I know I shouldn't be jealous, but who does this guy think he is? Is she messaging him? Is she dating someone else? I feel like I need to do something. What should I do? A, break into her page when she's not around and check her messages. B, hire a private detective. C, just ask her. Her reaction will say it all.
Yeah. Yeah.
A, B, or C?
Okay, so in less than a minute, a message is given saying, hey, think about this, you know, and even the crazy, funny answers I'm going to put out there for you too, so you can laugh a little bit. So within less than a minute, students are getting a different message. Well, it's not so much a message as, hey, think about this. You know, what do you think is the best way to respond? All right, so we've just been around the world, a fast trip. Wow. And now, here we are in Wisconsin. And I want to highlight the work of the Wisconsin Coalition Against Domestic Violence. They have been around for decades now. The first shelter in Wisconsin was in in Milwaukee, then one in Madison. But the National Organization Against Domestic Violence was founded in Milwaukee at a conference. And then the state coalition has been very active throughout the state with many programs. They have a special center on elder abuse. It's a national resource center. They do training of shelter providers all around the state. And they're very involved in helping train police, prosecutors, judges, and they also have an abuser intervention coalition that's part of the broader coalition. So they're doing wonderful work, and they have for decades. They changed their name. It's called End Abuse Wisconsin now. Many coalitions around the country, in fact, instead of saying coalition against domestic violence, they're saying end domestic violence. Much more powerful language putting out there to end domestic violence. And I thought I'd put one example up there on prevention program on teen dating violence, which they have helped through trainings and consultation. This one is located up in Chippewa County and is an example of how they get federal money from the Centers for Disease Control. In this case, they get money from the Federal Office on Violence Against Women. They get money from the Centers for Disease Control that does a great job on prevention programs like this one through the Delta program up in Chippewa County. Then, close by, in Appleton, we have the Fox Valley Voices of Men, a group of men dedicated to changing the attitudes and actions of men and boys. And they've had a tremendous turnout, over 600 men and women showing up for their annual breakfast, and a very active campaign involving outreach. And in this case, you can see a play that they're putting on, how do men remove the mask of masculinity, having plays. A theater troupe from Neenah High School came and performed at this last one. People were encouraged to wear a mask and then learn how to take it off. Take off these statements like, don't be a wuss, never look weak, asking for help is weak, never cry. Grow a pair, I think that has to do with hunting deer, doesn't it? Or no, the rack one, nice rack. You say that to your hunting partner who got a 14-pointer. Nice rack, isn't that? Yeah. So I've given you in some handout material information. There's going to be some handout material that you can get as you leave, or that we can pass out now. I don't know what's best, but no, that's a different one. Yeah. That'll tell you more about the Fox Valley Voices of Men. I just talked to their outreach coordinator, Shannon. They're willing to come here and do a presentation, tell you how you can get involved and maybe start a white ribbon campaign or a Voices campaign here. And then, right close to home, we have the CAPS services. And we have people here from CAPS right now. Any representatives? But I wanted to highlight one of the prevention efforts happened just a couple hours ago, which is a march, a 1-mile march, to make noise to stop the silence about domestic violence. So there is the Journey program coming together, and they need a bit more money to start a shelter here so women don't have to travel off to Appleton or Stevens Point. Hopefully someday you'll have a program here for abusers so they don't have to travel off to Stevens Point or Appleton. So I put information in the handout for you on their phone numbers, the services they provide, support groups for children, all kinds of services that they can provide, but not enough. So there needs to be more funding raised right now for the Journey program to have a shelter right here. Some of the representatives working on that are in the back of the room. Could you be around after the talk to talk to people? Oh, that'd be great. Okay, over in the corner. And you all have the same T-shirt on. Is that right? That says what? Yes. Journeys. All right. Thanks for being here. Okay. All right. So I want to end my talk with a couple of men's prayers. Because, as I said, when we talk about prevention, it's easy to get a lot of the women on board to rise up and to dance and do all of that, but getting men on board is really crucial. So You know, it looks like about half the people here tonight are men. Wow, that's good. That's good. That's good. All right. So there's a couple men's prayers here to end with, and one of them starts out, I am a man, but I can change. What's the rest? If I have to, I guess. You know that one? You never watched the Red Green Show? No? Okay. I am a man, but I can change. It's at the end of the show. The Possum Lodge, they go down to the basement and they do the Possum Lodge oath, and then the man's prayer. Okay. Wow, it should be here in Wapaka too, of all places. Okay. All right. So the other man's prayer, it's called the man prayer, is one that Eve Ensler wrote. And this will take us around the world and back again as well. I wanted to end with these words.
שהוא מבין שהפגיעות זה החוזק הגדול שלי. עדיין זה כאן, נזמני.
जो जानने से अधिक सुनने की सराहना करता है
che cerca la bontà oltre il controllo.
कि chora quando a dor é profunda.
Puedo apreciar una caricia más que el rendimiento.
Die ervaring meer as mooie te kom.
Laat ons langzaam bewegen van niks naar.
Ho kupiti hrabar da odam moj strah i sramotu.
אני פסלתי אותם להוביל, enfin il est
Que je cesse de prétendre et ouvre toutes mes parties, resté trop longtemps endormi.
May I cherish, respect, and love my mother.
وأترجم صدى الحب ده لمحبة كل النساء والكائنات الحية.
Thank you so much for going on this journey with me around the world and back again, back here to Wapaka. And please rise up with me and everyone else who will rise with you. Thanks for giving me the privilege to be here with you. Thanks.
Okay, we will take questions from the audience at this time. And could someone from the Board of Trustees help me with one of these? Georgia, you got it? So when you have a question, we'll come with a mic so the whole audience can hear you. Any questions, comments?
Questions or comments, ideas, examples? Yes.
Do you also reach out to police officers and to emergency rooms so that people are referred to counseling or
definitely.
other types of things?
Yes. Yeah, for decades now, ever since I started this work back in Madison in the mid-'70s, I remember training police officers. It's difficult. What we'd like to have is a police officer who really gets it, who understands domestic violence to do the training. Same with judges. They don't like to go for training. They don't want to admit that they need the training, and they don't want to be seen at a conference. So what we have the Judicial Council of the National Council of Judges getting judges to train judges and bringing them together. So yes, prosecutors, healthcare workers, definitely. There are national initiatives that do that kind of training. The Futures Without Violence group that I showed you here, they have a special health focus and train healthcare workers all around the country. Yeah, it's very important. Thanks for the question. Yes?
From what you experienced in the 70s until now, do you see a rise in the occasions of violence? And if so, what do you believe to be the cause?
There's been a dramatic decrease in non-lethal violence and lethal violence. It's easier to study the lethal violence, obviously. You know, you have the evidence there. Somebody died. The non-lethal violence is harder to study, but the evidence is good that just like most crime in our country over the last 20, 25 years, the rates of violence have gone down with many different explanations. But there is some good evidence that the services for victims and the laws that hold abusers accountable, when you have good arrest laws in a state, so they've been able to study one state and then another that has better kinds of protections for victims. So each state is a unit of analysis. So in those states where there's more legal protection, more support services for victims, homicide rates are down for domestic homicides. So there's a relationship there. It's hard to gauge if you're there on the front lines. If you're taking people out of the river who are drowning, all you're seeing are drowning people. So people doing the work have a hard time gauging if there's an increase or decrease. But the research is pretty clear that thankfully the numbers have gone down. But a lot more work to do. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
As a recently retired family doctor, I've seen a kind of a skewed view of this maybe, but almost always I've found alcohol to be involved.
Yes.
And
yes.
The pictures didn't really comment on that.
Yes. Yeah, the international study did find that a connection with alcohol abuse. One reason I didn't put that up there is it's a very complex issue. Whether or not it's a direct causal relationship, or certainly there seem to be some indirect causal relationships there in terms of maybe some long-term brain damage or impulsivity as withdrawal happens. So it may not be the alcohol itself. And then, for some of the men that I worked with would admit that the alcohol was a type of excuse. It's not always that, but, I'm going to get drunk and then who knows what I'm going to do, but really knowing what they were going to do. So there's certainly a correlation with alcohol. For other drugs, it's not quite as clear. Yeah. Over here. Yeah. Yeah.
Is there any relationship established between the handheld video games and the violence portrayed there? It seems true to me. I mean, it seemed idiotic years ago when people said, should movies have violence in them because it teaches it? And there was an element of our population that said, oh no, it has no effect. I think that's wrong.
Yeah, it's been a few years since I've looked at that research, but I think there has been shown a connection there with video games, violent video games. And one of the sad things, of course, they've gotten more and more graphic, right? I mean, these ones where the blood is spewing all over, and there's a kind of desensitization, I think, that happens. So I think overall there has been a connection. It's hard to sort out because sometimes it's the violent youth who are attracted to those games. So you have to kind of tease that apart and work on it. But I think overall, yes, there is a connection. Yeah.
How do you feel about the country at war and that effect indirectly on the violence in all of us, and especially young men?
Yeah, great question. Yeah. So there are studies that have been done over the last 100 years and looked at when a country is at war and then what happens, not immediately, but a delay effect in terms of suicides and homicides, and there is generally a relationship there. Yeah. Well, we know, it's so sad that we haven't done more for our veterans, especially in recent years. And So at Fort Bragg down in Georgia, special ops coming back, there were 5 homicides, domestic homicides, within, I think, 1 year. And the Pentagon is doing its best to investigate, but we need to do so much more for people coming back, with the multiple deployments, right? And what's happened there, the stressors, being apart from their families for so long, and then, of course, being exposed to violence. Yeah, that does have a huge impact. The levels of PTSD that's untreated in our veteran population, it's really criminal that we haven't done more.
I've always thought it was curious that we call it domestic violence versus assault and battery, and that the crime is different when it happens in your home with people you should love. And we've talked about that. Why we don't just call it assault and battery.
Yeah, in most states it is assault and battery, and in most cases that's what we were trying to work on in the 70s, is to make sure it was on par, that if you're assaulted walking down the street here, right outside the library by a stranger, that should be treated just the same as being battered at home. And so in most states, that's what happened, because we have pro-arrest policies where you don't have, in the old days, you had to get the victim's cooperation, a kind of a test. Will you go and testify now against your partner or not? As opposed to what we have now in most states, which is, this is a crime against the state. It's not a crime against a person, it's a crime against the state, because often children are involved witnessing it. The likelihood that that offender will find another person to batter, go from half the men who leave one relationship where they've battered go on and find another partner to batter. So that's why we have put the focus. Even prosecutors where the victim will not testify is a reluctant victim, because she's scared to death because of the threats she's gotten, right? So they can take 911 calls, the tape, they can take the photographs of the injury at the time of the assault, put all of that together to try to make a case that will convict. So generally, we have tried to say, they are the same. There are some states that make it more of a crime if a child witnessed the violence. And then here in Wisconsin, the speaker today outside at the rally was talking about the third strike law that I'm not familiar with in Wisconsin, but the penalties now have been increased if there's a third assault in a domestic violence case. Am I getting that right? Okay, thank you. So yeah, there's a lot going on around the country to try to hold the abuser accountable, as we say. And then generally, it doesn't mean jail time. I don't know if you understand that in most cases, women are reluctant to follow through, partly because they don't want their partner in jail, because that means losing the breadwinner often. So what most women they want him to change. And one way to do that is to use arrest to push him into treatment. Okay,
I hope the mic, but I have a question.
Okay.
Would you speak a little bit about social class and economics and the crossing of whether domestic violence occurs at all levels, or?
Yeah, and those are actually two different important points. Two very, they're different points, but they're both true, that domestic violence cuts across all different social classes, religions, racial groups, ethnic groups. Okay, so it exists in all of those, but it is more frequent in some than others. So people who are less educated, lower class, lower income, and it has everything to do with the stresses that people feel when, like the one slide that I showed you, work stress is a big factor, and that has a lot to do with being underemployed, unemployed, really fighting day to day to keep food on the table. That's going to add a lot of stress to the family. It adds a lot of stress in cultures I'm not sure if that's happened around here, but during the recession, but you see it in immigrant groups, you see it in Native American groups, where it's easier for the woman to get a job than the man. You know, like in the service, like in hotel maid kinds of work. And what does that do, especially in traditionally macho culture? It's like, okay, she can get a job. Well, that's good. You know, we need the money coming in, and yet, as much as I don't want it to feel bad, you know, I'm taking that as something bad about me as a man, because us men, us guys have been conditioned so much to put our value on our jobs.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Clean up here.
Are girls and women in countries that suffer abuse because of religious or cultural conditions, say in Africa, Pakistan, Middle East, where women are kept virtually almost imprisoned in some places, are they part of this global movement?
Well, to the extent that they can be, yes. In some countries, there have been rising up in campaigns to stop female genital mutilation, and stopping that from happening here in the States as well, of people going to doctors to try to have that performed. So we need to pay attention to what's happening here as well. But certainly, yeah, in countries where women are almost enslaved, they need permission to go out of the house, they need an escort, male escort. Yeah, so a lot of work that needs to be done. And making sure that we sometimes take a hard look at our scriptures, whether it's the Quran or the Christian Bible, or, you know, to really look at what those words mean. A common one is spare the rod and spoil the child. And the rod, if you look at the Hebrew, is more of a staff for leading, you know, because who beats a sheep with a staff to get them to do anything? You know, so that's one example of where people have tried to take a look at various interpretations by going back to the original wording, you know, of whatever the language might be. Yeah. So thank you so much for staying, for your participation, your questions. Thank you. Thank you very much.